Welcome to Smart Reads in Minutes. Today we're diving into The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg with a detailed chapter-by-chapter summary. Let's get started. Prologue: The Habit Cure. Lisa Allen was an enigma to researchers studying habit formation. At 34, her life story was a cycle of unhealthy routines and poor decisions. She had started smoking and drinking at 16, struggled with obesity for most of her life, and had a history of financial instability, including mounting debts from collection agencies. Her longest job had lasted less than a year, and she had spent years feeling stuck in patterns of self-destructive behavior. Yet, when scientists at a research lab outside Bethesda, Maryland first met her, they saw someone almost unrecognizable compared to her documented past. Lisa was fit and vibrant, with the physique of a runner, and appeared nearly a decade younger than her old photographs suggested. She had quit smoking, lost 60 pounds, run a marathon, maintained stable employment for over 3 years, and even begun working toward a master's degree. The researchers, neurologists, psychologists, geneticists, and sociologists, had been studying Lisa and several others who had similarly overhauled their lives in a short period. They wanted to understand how habits work on a neurological level and what it took to change them. Their methods included tracking participants' vital signs, installing cameras in their homes to observe daily routines, sequencing portions of their DNA, and even scanning their brains in real time to observe neural activity when exposed to various temptations like cigarette smoke or junk food. Lisa's case was particularly interesting because she had not only changed one habit, but had created a cascading transformation across multiple areas of her life. Lisa recounted to the researchers how her change had begun. A few months after her husband abruptly left her for another woman, she had reached a breaking point. She had spent weeks in a spiral of self-destructive behaviors, crying, binge-eating, and obsessing over her ex-husband's new relationship. One night, in a moment of recklessness, she drank heavily and confronted her ex's girlfriend at her apartment, pounding on the door and threatening to burn down the condo. Realizing the depth of her downward spiral, Lisa decided she needed to escape. She impulsively booked a trip to Cairo, Egypt, in an attempt to distract herself from her pain. On her first morning in Cairo, Lisa woke up feeling disoriented and reached for a cigarette. In the darkness, she mistakenly tried to light a pen instead of a Marlboro. The absurdity of the moment struck her. Her life was crumbling, and she couldn't even manage to smoke correctly. Lying in bed, she felt overwhelmed by sadness and frustration. As she got up and accidentally knocked over a water jug, causing it to shatter, something clicked inside her. She realized that she had to change something, anything, if she wanted to regain control of her life. Later that day, as she rode in a taxi past the pyramids of Giza, she experienced a rare moment of clarity. She needed a goal, something to work toward. In a spontaneous decision, she told herself that she would come back to Egypt one day and trek across the desert. But to do that, she would need to get in shape, and to get in shape, she would need to quit smoking. At that moment, Lisa committed to a single change: giving up cigarettes. What Lisa didn't realize was that this one decision would act as a keystone habit, a fundamental change that would trigger a chain reaction in other areas of her life. As she successfully quit smoking, she developed a newfound sense of control. She replaced her cigarette cravings with jogging, which in turn altered how she ate, how she spent her money, how she structured her days, and ultimately, how she perceived herself. The neural pathways associated with her old habits still existed in her brain, but they had been overwritten by new routines. Lisa's case became one of the most compelling examples of habit modification studied by the scientists. They discovered that when individuals focus on altering just one habit, especially a keystone habit, it can lead to broad and lasting transformation. Businesses, too, began leveraging this insight, using habit loops to influence consumer behavior, from Procter & Gamble's marketing strategies to Starbucks employee training programs. The research confirmed a powerful truth. Habits are not fixed. They can be reshaped. And when individuals understand how habits function in the brain, they gain the ability to reprogram their own behaviors, opening the door to personal and professional transformation. Chapter 1. The Habit Loop: How Habits Work. In 1993, a man named Eugene Pauly walked into a research laboratory in San Diego, marking the beginning of a series of experiments that would revolutionize the understanding of habits. Eugene, or EP, as he would become known in scientific literature, had suffered from viral encephalitis, an infection that had destroyed a significant portion of his brain, particularly in the medial temporal lobe, the region responsible for memory formation. As a result, he could not remember anything new for more than a few moments. Despite his condition, Eugene exhibited a striking ability. He could navigate his home, prepare meals, and even go for walks in his neighborhood, all without consciously remembering where he was going. To the researchers studying him, this was a mystery. If Eugene could not remember where he lived, how was he able to find his way home? To uncover the answer, scientists turned to a deeper understanding of habit formation. They identified a fundamental neurological pattern governing habitual behavior, known as the habit loop, which consists of three components: the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue is the trigger that initiates a habit. It can be an external stimulus, such as a specific time of day, a location, or an emotional state. In Eugene's case, walking outside and seeing his front yard served as a cue for his habitual walking route. The routine is the action itself, which can be a physical behavior, like brushing teeth, a mental process, like checking social media, or an emotional response, like reaching for comfort food when stressed. The reward is the benefit or pleasure derived from completing the routine, reinforcing the cycle, and making the behavior more likely to repeat. In Eugene's brain, even though he had no conscious memory of his daily walks, the habit loop allowed him to complete them automatically. MIT researchers conducted experiments on rats that further confirmed how the habit loop operates. They placed rats in a T-shaped maze with chocolate at the end and monitored their brain activity. At first, the rats explored the maze with heightened neural activity, analyzing their surroundings. However, as they repeated the process, their brain activity decreased. Over time, they learned to associate a sound cue, a clicking noise, with the opening of the maze partition, allowing them to reach the chocolate faster and with less cognitive effort. Their brains were no longer actively problem-solving. Instead, they had developed a habit loop that operated on autopilot. This discovery revealed a critical insight. Habits function by offloading decision-making to a more primitive part of the brain, the basal ganglia, which allows behaviors to become automatic. This is why once a habit is established, it can persist even if the conscious mind wants to change it. It also explains why habits are so powerful. They require less cognitive effort and can operate in the background without active thought. However, habits are not destiny. They can be modified by identifying the cues and rewards that sustain them and then substituting the routine with a different behavior. This process is the foundation of habit change. Companies, marketers, and behavioral scientists have harnessed this knowledge to shape consumer behavior. For example, Procter & Gamble revolutionized the sales of Febreze by embedding it into consumers' cleaning habits, using cues, the act of finishing cleaning, and rewards, a fresh scent, to reinforce its use. Similarly, Alcoholics Anonymous has successfully helped millions of people recover from addiction by replacing destructive routines with healthier alternatives, all while keeping the same cues and rewards intact. Understanding the habit loop provides a framework for both personal and societal change. It demonstrates that habits are deeply ingrained but also malleable. Armed with this knowledge, individuals can reshape their own behaviors, organizations can improve productivity, and even entire movements can be built on the foundation of habit modification. Chapter 2. The Craving Brain: How to Create New Habits. Cravings play a central role in the formation and persistence of habits. Unlike the simple cue routine reward loop described earlier, scientists have discovered that the true power of habit formation lies in the emergence of cravings. These cravings develop when the brain starts anticipating a reward before it is even received. In other words, habits become self-reinforcing because of the neurological expectation of pleasure or relief. This explains why some habits are harder to break than others. The craving itself becomes embedded in the brain's circuitry. One of the most illustrative examples of this phenomenon comes from the story of Claude Hopkins, an advertising executive who helped popularize Pepsodent toothpaste in the early 1900s. At the time, very few Americans brushed their teeth regularly, and dental hygiene was a widespread issue. Hopkins, who had previously turned products like Quaker Oats into household names, was tasked with convincing the public that brushing their teeth was essential. Rather than simply promoting Pepsodent as a toothpaste, he crafted a narrative around an appealing sensation. He emphasized the film that builds up on teeth and how Pepsodent could remove it, leaving a cool, tingling sensation behind. This tingling sensation wasn't necessary for cleaning teeth, but it provided a satisfying and noticeable reward. Over time, users began to crave the tingling feeling, which reinforced the habit of brushing their teeth daily. Within a decade, daily toothbrushing became a national routine, largely thanks to this strategy. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz conducted experiments that further confirmed how cravings drive habits. He studied a monkey named Julio, who was trained to recognize that when a certain shape appeared on a screen, he could pull a lever and receive a drop of blackberry juice. Initially, Julio's brain only showed heightened activity when he received the juice. However, over time, his neural patterns changed. His brain started lighting up the moment he saw the shape, before he even touched the lever. He had begun anticipating the reward. If, for some reason, the juice wasn't delivered, his brain activity would spike in frustration. The craving for the expected reward had become deeply ingrained. This same neurological process applies to human behavior. Cravings explain why people develop habits like checking their phones when they hear a notification sound, why smokers feel compelled to light a cigarette, or why shoppers are drawn to the scent of Cinnabon. The brain learns to associate certain cues with pleasurable outcomes, and over time, the craving for the reward drives behavior more than the reward itself. For instance, studies have shown that people who develop exercise habits often don't start off enjoying working out. Instead, they initially force themselves to go to the gym. But eventually, they begin to crave the endorphin rush, the feeling of accomplishment, or even something as simple as a post-workout smoothie. It's not the act of exercising that keeps them coming back. It's the neurological craving for the anticipated reward. Marketers have long understood how to exploit this craving-based habit loop. Companies like Starbucks train employees not just in customer service, but in creating experiences that generate cravings. For example, baristas are taught to say customers' names and personalize their interactions, reinforcing a psychological reward that makes customers feel recognized and valued. This, in turn, strengthens their craving for not just coffee, but the entire Starbucks experience. The key to forming a new habit is not just establishing a cue and a reward, but creating a craving in between. For a behavior to become automatic, the brain must start expecting the pleasure of the reward before the action is even completed. This is why new habits fail when they don't trigger a sense of anticipation. By deliberately choosing and reinforcing rewards, whether it's the satisfaction of crossing off a to-do list, the excitement of social validation, or the physical pleasure of an endorphin rush, people can hack their own habit loops to create lasting change. Chapter 3: The Golden Rule of Habit Change. Why transformation occurs. The fundamental principle of habit change is that bad habits cannot be erased, only replaced. This concept, known as the golden rule of habit change, is based on the discovery that habits are deeply ingrained in the brain and persist even after they seem to be broken. However, they can be transformed by keeping the same cues and rewards while substituting a new routine in place of the old one. This is the key insight behind programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, which helps individuals replace their drinking habits with social support structures, rather than attempting to eliminate their cravings entirely. A compelling example of this principle in action is the story of Tony Dungy, a football coach who turned the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from one of the worst teams in the NFL into a championship contender. Dungy's coaching philosophy was based on the idea that players needed to build automatic responses, habits that they could rely on under pressure. Rather than teaching complex strategies, he drilled his players on simple, instinctual behaviors that they would execute without thinking. The goal was to replace old, ineffective habits with new, more productive ones while keeping the same cues the moment the ball is snapped, and rewards winning the play. Initially, the Buccaneers struggled with this approach, as they would revert to old habits in high-stress situations. However, as they continued reinforcing the new habits, they began to instinctively execute Dungy's strategies even under immense pressure. Eventually, this led to a series of victories, proving that changing habits could lead to dramatic transformation. One of the most famous applications of the golden rule of habit change is seen in Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. Studies of AA have shown that its success lies not in eliminating alcohol cravings, but in replacing the drinking habit with social support and belief in change. Former alcoholics still experience the same triggers: stress, social gatherings, loneliness, but instead of drinking, they learn to attend meetings or call sponsors. The reward remains the same: relief from anxiety or companionship. However, the routine has been modified. Researchers have found that this substitution process is crucial because it leverages existing neural pathways rather than trying to erase them, which is nearly impossible. However, replacing a habit is not enough. For the transformation to be permanent, people must believe change is possible. This belief is often instilled through groups or communities. Studies show that individuals who attempt to change habits alone are more likely to relapse, whereas those who engage with a support network, whether it's AA, religious groups, or even informal accountability partners, have significantly higher success rates. The power of social reinforcement helps individuals maintain belief in their ability to change, even when faced with setbacks. This insight extends beyond individual behavior and into broader societal change. Civil rights movements, corporate turnarounds, and even military training programs have leveraged the golden rule of habit change. For example, Rosa Parks' arrest was not the first time an African American had refused to give up their seat on a bus. However, what made her case different was that she was deeply embedded in a network of activists who were ready to act. The civil rights movement had spent years cultivating habits of protest and organization, and Parks's arrest became the cue that triggered a massive coordinated response. The movement succeeded because it had already ingrained new social habits that could replace the old ones. The golden rule of habit change is a powerful framework for understanding personal and social transformation. Habits persist because they are neurologically encoded, but by carefully manipulating cues and rewards while substituting new routines, they can be reshaped. And perhaps most importantly, belief, whether in oneself, in a system, or in a group, plays a crucial role in making new habits stick. This is why, when people succeed in changing their habits, they often describe the experience as not just behavioral, but transformational. The key to real change lies not just in discipline, but in altering the underlying craving that drives behavior while reinforcing belief in the possibility of transformation. Chapter 4. Keystone Habits, or the Ballad of Paul O'Neill. Which habits matter most? On a chilly October day in 1987, a group of high-profile Wall Street investors and stock analysts gathered in a Manhattan hotel ballroom to meet the new CEO of the Aluminum Company of America, commonly known as Alcoa. The company had been a dominant force in the aluminum industry for nearly a century, manufacturing products ranging from soda can linings to aerospace components. However, in recent years, Alcoa had faced mounting challenges. Its management had made poor strategic moves, competitors were eroding its market share, and its stock was underperforming. Investors hoped that the new CEO, Paul O'Neill, would unveil a plan for aggressive growth and increased profitability. When O'Neill took the stage, he looked every bit the part of a confident executive, trim, well-dressed, and exuding an air of authority. But when he opened his mouth, the audience was taken aback. Instead of discussing profit margins, market expansion, or cost-cutting strategies, O'Neill declared that his top priority as CEO would be worker safety. His goal, he said, was to make Alcoa the safest company in America. He explained that accidents were a sign of poor organizational habits, and by focusing on safety, Alcoa could streamline its entire operations. Investors were baffled. Some hurriedly left the room to call their clients, urging them to sell their shares immediately. What these investors didn't realize was that O'Neill was implementing a radical business philosophy centered on Keystone Habits. Those fundamental behaviors that, when changed, trigger a cascade of improvements throughout an entire system. O'Neill believed that by prioritizing safety, he would set off a chain reaction that would enhance communication, operational efficiency, and ultimately, financial performance. Within months of his tenure, O'Neill introduced sweeping changes. He required plant managers to report all injuries directly to him within 24 hours and mandated immediate action plans for preventing future incidents. This policy forced managers to improve how they tracked performance, identified inefficiencies, and engaged with workers. Over time, the changes led to streamlined processes, higher morale, and improved productivity. The results were astonishing. Alcoa's injury rate plummeted to one of the lowest in the country, and at the same time, its profits soared. By the time O'Neill retired in 2000, Alcoa's stock price had increased by over 200%, and the company was one of the best-performing stocks on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Even more remarkable, Alcoa had become one of the safest workplaces in the world. O'Neill's approach demonstrated the power of Keystone Habits. Unlike other types of habits, Keystone Habits influence a wide range of behaviors and organizational structures. They create a ripple effect, driving change in unexpected areas. Research has shown that Keystone Habits are present in various aspects of life and business. For example, studies indicate that people who develop the habit of regular exercise often begin eating healthier, smoking less, and managing their time better. Similarly, families that eat dinner together regularly tend to have children with better academic performance and stronger emotional well-being. The concept of Keystone Habits has been adopted by numerous organizations. Companies like Starbucks, McKinsey & Company, and even sports teams have recognized that focusing on a single transformative habit can lead to widespread improvements. The lesson from O'Neill's leadership at Alcoa is clear. Instead of trying to change everything at once, individuals and organizations should identify the one habit that, if transformed, will set off a domino effect of positive change. Chapter 5: Starbucks and the Habit of Success, when willpower becomes automatic. Travis Leach grew up in a chaotic home environment marked by instability and addiction. His parents were heroin users, and his childhood was defined by constant relocations, neglect, and the trauma of witnessing overdoses at an early age. As a teenager, Travis struggled with self-discipline, skipping school frequently, and eventually dropping out. Without clear direction or a sense of purpose, he drifted through life with no aspirations for the future. Everything changed when he got a job at Starbucks. For Travis, the coffee shop was more than just a workplace. It became his training ground for life skills and self-discipline. Starbucks, unlike many entry-level employers, invests heavily in habit formation among its employees. The company recognized early on that customer service requires more than just technical skills. It demands willpower, the ability to regulate emotions, stay calm under pressure, and consistently deliver a high-quality experience. To build willpower among its employees, Starbucks developed a habit training system that focused on managing stressful situations. The company identified common inflection points, moments when employees were most likely to lose self-control, such as dealing with an angry customer. Instead of relying on spontaneous reactions, baristas were trained to follow a structured approach. One such strategy was the LATTE method: listen to the customer, acknowledge their complaint, take action to resolve the issue, thank the customer, explain why the mistake happened. By rehearsing these responses repeatedly, employees internalize them as automatic behaviors, reducing the likelihood of emotional reactions. The training ensured that even when an employee was exhausted or frustrated, their response to conflict remained consistent. Starbucks' focus on habit formation extended beyond customer interactions. The company also instilled self-discipline habits that encouraged employees to show up on time, stay focused during long shifts, and take ownership of their responsibilities. The company even provided workbooks where employees could anticipate challenges and create personal action plans. This structured approach was designed to make willpower a habit, something employees could rely on instinctively rather than something that required conscious effort every time a challenge arose. The impact of these training methods was profound. Employees like Travis, who had once struggled with stability and self-discipline, found themselves thriving in an environment that gave them clear behavioral frameworks. Over time, Travis rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a store manager, overseeing multiple employees. His transformation was a testament to the fact that willpower, like any other habit, can be cultivated through practice and repetition. The principles behind Starbucks' training methods align with psychological research on willpower. Studies show that self-discipline is one of the most important predictors of success, more so than IQ or natural talent. Researchers have found that people who develop strong willpower habits are more likely to excel academically, maintain stable relationships, and achieve long-term goals. In one study conducted at the University of Pennsylvania, researchers tracked students' self-discipline levels and found that those with higher self-discipline consistently outperformed their peers, regardless of intelligence. Starbucks' success is a reflection of its ability to institutionalize willpower. Unlike other companies that focus solely on job performance, Starbucks recognized that teaching life skills would not only benefit its employees, but also its bottom line. By equipping workers with habits of self-discipline, emotional regulation, and structured responses to stress, Starbucks ensured that employees could consistently meet customer expectations, even under pressure. This approach demonstrates a crucial insight into habit formation. The best way to strengthen willpower is to turn it into a habit. When people prepare for challenges in advance and create specific routines to navigate them, they reduce the mental effort required to make good decisions. Whether it's a Starbucks barista handling an upset customer or an athlete preparing for a critical moment in a game, success often hinges on how well habits are ingrained. By understanding and applying these principles, organizations and individuals can develop willpower as a predictable and automatic part of daily life. Chapter 6. The Power of a Crisis: How Leaders Create Habits Through Accident and Design. The power of crises in shaping habits is a fundamental insight into how organizational change occurs. Crises often act as catalysts, creating the necessary tension to break deeply ingrained but dysfunctional routines. When people or institutions are forced into a situation where old habits no longer function effectively, they become more open to new patterns. This principle is particularly evident in high-stakes environments such as hospitals, corporations, and even government agencies, where habitual processes can either lead to success or catastrophic failure. One of the most striking examples of this phenomenon took place at Rhode Island Hospital, a prestigious teaching institution affiliated with Brown University. Despite its reputation for medical excellence, the hospital suffered from a deeply dysfunctional culture rooted in a hierarchical power dynamic that prevented nurses from questioning doctors. This rigid structure led to repeated medical errors, including several incidents of surgeons operating on the wrong body parts. Nurses, fearful of retaliation, refrained from speaking up even when they noticed mistakes. The consequences of this toxic work culture became tragically evident when an elderly patient underwent brain surgery on the wrong side of his head, ultimately leading to his death. The hospital's habitual dysfunction had been sustained by an unspoken truce between nurses and doctors, where nurses silently corrected mistakes, but avoided direct confrontation. However, this informal system collapsed under stress, proving ineffective when the stakes were highest. The tragedy triggered widespread outrage, leading to state investigations, fines, and intense media scrutiny. The ensuing crisis finally forced the hospital to confront its deeply ingrained habits. Hospital administrators implemented sweeping changes, including mandatory safety checklists, communication training, and policies encouraging nurses to challenge doctors without fear of retribution. Within a few years, the hospital had transformed into one of the safest medical institutions in the country. The crisis had provided the necessary leverage to reset organizational habits and establish a culture of accountability. Crises have also been instrumental in reshaping industries beyond healthcare. One notable case is NASA's transformation after the Challenger disaster in 1986. For years, the space agency had tolerated a culture where safety concerns were often dismissed in favor of maintaining schedules and political expectations. The explosion of the Challenger space shuttle, which killed all 7 crew members, was a direct result of these institutional habits. In the wake of the disaster, NASA underwent a comprehensive overhaul, adopting new safety procedures, implementing rigorous quality control measures, and fostering a culture where engineers were encouraged to voice concerns without fear of professional repercussions. Similarly, the London Underground's safety crisis in 1987 forced a fundamental shift in operational habits. A devastating fire at the King's Cross station, caused by the accumulation of flammable debris and an outdated response system, led to 31 deaths. The investigation revealed that bureaucratic inertia and misaligned responsibilities had contributed to the catastrophe. The fire prompted immediate policy changes, including improved emergency protocols, clearer chain-of-command structures, and regular safety drills. These reforms not only prevented future disasters, but also instilled a broader culture of accountability within the organization. A crucial takeaway from these examples is that crises, while devastating, create opportunities for change that would otherwise be resisted. Organizational habits are difficult to shift under normal circumstances, as employees and leaders tend to default to familiar routines. However, when a crisis disrupts the status quo, there is an opening to introduce new behaviors and solidify them as lasting habits. The key to successful change lies in leveraging these moments effectively, whether in hospitals, corporations, or government agencies, by embedding new routines that prevent a relapse into old, harmful patterns. This principle extends to political and economic systems as well. Leaders often recognize that crises provide unique windows of opportunity to push through reforms that would be unthinkable in times of stability. The financial crisis of 2008, for instance, allowed policymakers to enact sweeping regulatory changes aimed at curbing risky banking practices. Similarly, during moments of political upheaval, governments have introduced reforms that might have otherwise faced insurmountable resistance. Crises, whether in institutions or entire societies, expose the weaknesses of existing habits and create the urgency needed to form new ones. The lesson is clear: when old habits fail, crises become the perfect moment to design better systems. Chapter 7. How Target knows what you want before you do. When companies predict and manipulate habits. Modern businesses have mastered the art of identifying and influencing consumer habits using predictive analytics to anticipate what customers want, often before they are consciously aware of their own needs. At the heart of this strategy is the ability to track shopping behaviors, analyze purchasing patterns, and subtly guide consumers towards specific products. This approach has been perfected by companies like Target, which has developed sophisticated algorithms capable of detecting life changes, such as pregnancy, and using that knowledge to tailor marketing efforts with astonishing precision. One of the key figures behind Target's predictive marketing success is Andrew Pohl, a statistician who was hired to help the company refine its customer analytics. Target executives posed an intriguing challenge to Pohl. Could he develop an algorithm capable of identifying pregnant women based on their shopping habits? Pregnancy is a particularly valuable life event for retailers because it marks a period when customers are more likely to switch brands and establish new purchasing routines. If Target could identify expectant mothers before their competitors, it could secure their loyalty early and influence their shopping habits for years to come. Using vast amounts of customer data, Pohl and his team identified a set of predictive indicators of pregnancy. These included seemingly mundane purchases such as unscented lotion, calcium supplements, large quantities of cotton balls, and specific types of vitamins. By analyzing past transactions, they discovered that when women started buying these products in a certain sequence, they were likely to be in the early stages of pregnancy. Once Target had this information, it could begin sending them personalized advertisements for maternity and baby products, often before they had even announced their pregnancy to friends and family. However, Target soon faced an ethical dilemma. When one angry father stormed into a store demanding to know why his teenage daughter was receiving advertisements for baby products, he later discovered that she was, in fact, pregnant. The revelation that Target had identified her condition before her own family led to concerns about corporate surveillance and consumer privacy. Target quickly adjusted its approach, embedding pregnancy-related promotions within more generic advertisements to avoid making customers feel spied on. By disguising targeted ads among random product discounts, Target ensured that customers remained unaware of how much the company actually knew about their lives. The ability to predict consumer behavior extends far beyond pregnancy. Retailers across industries use similar techniques to shape purchasing habits. Grocery stores track when customers buy seasonal items and send reminders for repeat purchases at just the right moment. Streaming platforms analyze viewing habits to recommend content that keeps users engaged. Credit card companies monitor spending patterns to detect major life changes, such as a new job or relocation, and use that data to offer tailored financial products. The central principle is that habitual behavior is predictable, and by leveraging these patterns, companies can subtly guide consumer decisions. Target's success demonstrates how companies don't just observe habits, they actively shape them. By strategically introducing new products in a way that feels familiar, businesses can drive the adoption of new behaviors. This principle applies not only to individual consumers, but also to society at large. Governments and public health organizations use similar tactics to influence habits around issues like smoking cessation, vaccination, and financial responsibility. The key to changing behavior, whether for profit or social good, lies in embedding new actions within established routines. Ultimately, Target's predictive marketing strategy underscores a larger truth about human behavior. We like to believe that our choices are independent, but in reality, they are often guided by unseen forces. The companies that understand this dynamic wield tremendous power, not just in shaping what we buy, but in influencing how we live. Chapter 8: Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott: How Movements Happen. Movements, whether they are religious, political, or social, follow a distinct pattern of growth. They emerge from the social habits of friendship, expand through the influence of weak ties within communities, and solidify when they instill habits that create a new sense of identity among their participants. Two major case studies illustrate this process: the rise of Saddleback Church, led by Rick Warren, and the Montgomery bus boycott, which catalyzed the American Civil Rights Movement. The Montgomery bus boycott began on December 1, 1955, when Rosa Parks, an African-American seamstress, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her act of defiance was not entirely spontaneous. Parks was already involved in civil rights activism, but it became the spark that ignited a movement. News of her arrest spread quickly through Montgomery's African-American community, largely due to the social networks and habits already in place. Joanne Robinson, a professor at Alabama State College, and other activists had been preparing for such an opportunity. They printed thousands of leaflets overnight calling for a bus boycott, and within days, the movement had gained massive support. Initially, the boycott relied on strong ties, friendships, and close social connections to mobilize participation. Parks was widely respected, and her arrest prompted her friends, church members, and fellow activists to take action. However, for the boycott to sustain itself beyond a few days, it had to extend beyond her immediate social circle. This is where weak ties, the loose social connections between acquaintances and community groups, played a crucial role. Black ministers across Montgomery, including the then unknown Martin Luther King Jr., helped spread the message to thousands of churchgoers. These weak ties created a sense of obligation. Individuals who might not have participated otherwise felt social pressure to join, knowing that their absence would be noticed by their neighbors and peers. The final and most critical phase of the movement came when the boycott transformed into a habit, changing participants' identities. Walking instead of riding the bus became a routine reinforced by daily commitment, community solidarity, and religious conviction. King's speeches framed the boycott as not just a protest, but as part of God's plan, linking the movement to a greater purpose. When faced with obstacles, such as the city's attempts to shut down carpools, the community adapted by organizing new solutions. Over time, the boycott became a self-sustaining force, lasting more than a year until the Supreme Court ruled segregation on public buses unconstitutional. This same pattern is evident in the rise of Saddleback Church, founded by Rick Warren in the 1980s. Warren understood that to grow his church, he needed to embed specific spiritual habits into the daily lives of his congregation. Rather than relying solely on weekly sermons, he designed a system of small groups where members formed close ties with one another. These groups were given structured discussions, prayer routines, and volunteer commitments, ensuring that faith became an integral part of daily life. The genius of Warren's approach was that it mirrored the same habit-driven social structure that had sustained the civil rights movement. People initially joined Saddleback Church because of weak ties, the general appeal of a welcoming community. But once they were involved, they were quickly connected to strong ties within small groups, making participation habitual. Warren's most significant insight was recognizing that a movement could not be sustained through charisma alone. It needed to cultivate daily rituals that reinforced identity. Both the Montgomery bus boycott and Saddleback Church illustrate how movements spread and endure. They begin with individuals taking a stand, grow through networks of weak ties, and become lasting when they change participants' self-perception. Social movements at their core are built on habits of commitment and identity, and when leaders understand this, they can create lasting change. Chapter 9. The Neurology of Free Will. Are we responsible for our habits? The question of free will and personal responsibility for habitual behaviors is complex. Science has shown that habits are deeply ingrained in the brain, often operating outside of conscious awareness. However, does this mean individuals are not responsible for their actions? To explore this dilemma, two case studies, one involving a gambling addict and another involving a man who committed murder while sleepwalking, illustrate the legal and ethical implications of habits. The first case is that of Angie Bachman, a woman who developed a compulsive gambling habit that ultimately ruined her financially. Bachman had lived an ordinary life as a stay-at-home mother for years, But after her children left for college, she found herself feeling isolated and unfulfilled. To fill the void, she started visiting casinos. At first, gambling was a casual hobby, but over time, it became a compulsion. She developed a habit loop where boredom, cue, led to gambling, routine, which provided an emotional escape, reward. Casino executives recognized her behavior and encouraged it, offering her free vacations, luxury hotel stays, and VIP treatment. As her gambling escalated, she lost hundreds of thousands of dollars and took out loans to continue. Eventually, she gambled away her parents' entire inheritance, destroying her family's financial security. When she later sued the casino, arguing that they had exploited her addiction, the courts ruled against her. The reasoning was that despite the habitual nature of her gambling, she had made a conscious choice to start in the first place. Once she recognized her addiction, she had the responsibility to stop. In contrast, Brian Thomas, a retired Englishman, killed his wife in his sleep and was acquitted of murder. Thomas had suffered from sleep disturbances for years, often experiencing night terrors. One night, while on vacation, he dreamed that an intruder was attacking his wife. Without waking, he strangled her to death. When he awoke and realized what had happened, he was devastated. Sleep specialists examined Thomas and found that he suffered from sleep automatism, a condition where the brain partially wakes but remains in a dream state. His actions were purely habitual responses, ingrained patterns triggered without conscious intent. The court concluded that because he had no control over his actions, he was not responsible for the crime. His case highlighted a critical distinction. While habits dictate much of human behavior, there is a difference between unconscious compulsions and habits that can be consciously recognized and altered. These cases reveal a fundamental tension in how society treats habitual behavior. On the one hand, habits are automatic and deeply rooted in neurological structures, making them difficult to change. On the other hand, once a person is aware of their habits, they bear some responsibility for managing them. Studies have shown that habits cannot simply be erased, but they can be reprogrammed by identifying cues, altering routines, and selecting different rewards. This means that while individuals might not be responsible for developing harmful habits initially, they do have the ability, and thus the responsibility, to change them once they become aware of their impact. The legal system increasingly acknowledges that not all habits are created equal. In the case of Thomas, his actions were purely involuntary and lacked awareness. In contrast, Bachmann, despite being trapped in a compulsive cycle, had reached a point where she could have sought help or made different choices. The key takeaway from neurological research is that habits shape much of human behavior, but with effort, they can be modified. Understanding this balance between free will and habit formation is essential for individuals seeking to reclaim control over their actions and for societies determining the boundaries of personal accountability. And that's a wrap on The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. If you found these insights valuable, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your biggest takeaways, and if there's a book you'd like me to summarize next, let me know in the comments. See you in the next one, with much love and gratitude.